Day 12 of the Alamo Siege, March 5th, 1836. On the evening of March 4th, 2 Tejanos from inside the Alamo provided the Mexican army with juicy intel about the number of men inside the walls and the general state of affairs in there. Rather than let the siege run its course, Santa Anna decided on an assault, sealing the fate of the date March 6th on the Texas calendar. After midnight, Santa Anna and General Castrillon were planning the assault as Santa Anna enjoyed a late supper. Castrillon worried aloud that storming the walls would be bloody. It would cost them dearly. If they waited for the field artillery pieces that were on the way, they could blow through the walls rather than climb them. While they waited for those cannon to arrive, the men inside the Alamo might surrender, again sparing the lives of soldiers. According to Fernando Orisa, aide-de-camp to Santa Anna, His Excellency held up a drumstick he was munching and wondered, what are the lives of our soldiers more than of so many chickens? If our soldiers are driven back, the next line in their rear must force those before them forward and compel them to scale the walls, cost what it may. After he finished his chicken dinner, he asked Orisa to write and dispatch his orders, saying that he would take his breakfast in the Alamo the next day, meaning March the 6th. His orders for the final assault on the Alamo began. The time has come to strike a decisive blow upon the enemy occupying the fortress of the Alamo. And here was the plan. Column 1, equipped with 10 ladders, 2 crowbars, and 2 axes, would be commanded by General Cos. Column 2, also equipped with 10 ladders, was to be commanded by Colonel Francisco Duque, comprising the Toluca Battalion and another part of the San Luis Battalion. Column 3, led by Jose Maria Romero, would be made up of the Fusileros, or riflemen, of the Matamoros and Jimenez battalions. They would carry 6 ladders to the walls. Column 4, with 2 ladders, would be in the charge of Colonel Juan Morales, composed of cazadores from the Matamoros, Jimenez, and San Luis battalions. The reserves, to be commanded by Santa Anna himself, would consist of the Granadero companies of all the battalions. The cavalry lancers, commanded by Sesma, would assemble at the Alameda at 3 a.m. to scout and rout escapees, should there be any. By 4 a.m., all attack columns were to be in place, about 100 yards from the Texian trenches around the Alamo, so within musket shot. They were to quietly await the bugle call from the newly placed North Artillery Battery located here, and then the columns were to advance. There were some basic rules laid out in Santa Anna's assault orders. Men who lacked sufficient training were to stay behind. Arms, bayonets especially, were to be placed in perfect trim, ready to go. All men destined for attack columns were to hit the sheets at sunset to be up and at 'em at midnight. No overcoats, no blankets, or anything else that might hinder movement was allowed to be worn. Shako chin straps had to be fastened. Shoes or sandals were required. In other words, no shoes, no cap, no shoot. Colonel Jose Enrique de la Peña noted that although some of the officers still disagreed with the timing of the assault, they only talked about it behind Santa Anna's back. A brisk fire from the North Battery continuously disrupted an otherwise lovely spring-like Central Texas day. Elsewhere in the Mexican camps, preparations were hastily being made since bedtime was to be at sundown. Ladders, axes, and ammunition were distributed. Eulalia Yorba, a young Bejarreña who watched the siege play out, in an 1896 interview said, "I never can tell the anxiety that we people on the outside felt for that mere handful of men in the old fort when we saw hostile troops as far as we could see and not a particle of help for the Texians, for whom we few residents of the town had previously formed a liking." Enrique Esparza, a boy who was hunkered down in the Alamo with his family and his defender father, later recalled, "We then had another messenger who got through the lines, saying communications had been cut off and the promised reinforcements could not be sent. Whether this news came with another small group of reinforcements or just a single courier is not known, but news of no reinforcements walks us face first into one of the elephants in the room of Alamo lore, the line in the sand." As the Mexican troops were retiring early, the booming from the North Battery ceased, leaving San Antonio, I would guess, eerily quiet. This respite, coupled with the reality that men from the settlements were not coming to help fight, while a couple of thousand Mexican troops were beyond the walls, the inevitability of the outcome probably hit Travis and his garrison pretty hard. And according to lore, Travis assembled the men and he addressed them. He declared his intention to fight and die, drew his sword and scratched a line in the sand, and then gave the men a choice. All who would stay and fight should cross the line. This moment is memorialized out in front of the Alamo Church today. But was there an actual line in the sand? Generations of historians have doubted that it happened, and I can tell you why. The historical record is, well, let's just say less than stellar on the subject. The line in the sand first appeared nearly 4 decades after the battle, as part of the story of a man who deserted the Alamo. That man, Louis Moses Rose, told his story to the Zuber family. They told the story to their son, William P. Zuber, and in 1871, Zuber wrote the story down. Travis drew the line in the sand, and that was the impetus for Rose to decide to bug out. The story of the Moses Rose desertion was published in the 1873 Texas Almanac, and the line in the sand went right along with it. Because Zuber's story of Moses Rose was third-hand, historians questioned the authenticity of it as soon as it was published. But the line in the sand was folded into the Alamo story and carried forth by newspaper accounts in the 1870s and 1880s. Zuber was a self-educated man who was a prolific writer, so to some extent we can get an idea of the man from his other writings. And I can tell you he had a habit of sensationalizing. In a story published in 1882, allegedly conveyed to him by a Mexican army fifer, for example, he has the Mexican troops slicing Bowie's tongue from his mouth and then throwing him on a funeral pyre alive. So there's that. Louis Moses Rose was a person that did exist, but Zuber is dubious. So why did his line in the sand story survive from the 1873 Texas Almanac to this 2024 video? Because it's compelling. Anna Pennybacker, whose History of Texas for Young People was used in classrooms for generations, included the story of the line in the sand, and that injected Zuber's tale directly into the veins of the Texas consciousness where it lives to this day. Of course, the concept of a line in the sand did not originate in 1836 in San Antonio. As far as historical narratives go, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro was a pioneer in more ways than one. In 1527, at the ripe old age of 50, he stood on a humid island off the coast of Colombia. He had no provisions and had lost the support of the crown. He wanted to go south to conquer Peru, but Spain wanted him to return north to Panama. As the legend goes, Pizarro pulled out his sword and drew a line in the sand. The 13 men who crossed it and chose to go with him to Peru are known as the famous 13. The story of Pizarro's line in the sand moved through the centuries in literature, plays, and history books. School children in the United States 3 centuries later were still reading about him. That would have included William Barrett Travis and certainly the avid reader William Zuber. Or perhaps the inspiration for the line in the sand story came from Ben Milam, who purportedly drew a line in the sand with the stock of his rifle during the Siege of Bear in 1835. Maybe Ben Milam drew his inspiration from Pizarro. We'll probably never know. It's certainly possible that William Zuber embellished the Moses Rose story. It's also possible that Travis did make such a dramatic gesture before the garrison. At bare minimum, it's most believable that he leveled with the garrison about their likely fate and gave them a choice. And in my opinion, the choices they made matter more than the physical line being drawn. Even if the 600 reinforcements from the settlements were to arrive, they'd still be vastly outnumbered, and they knew that. So their choices are what's compelling. It's compelling, line or no line, speech or no speech. Of the lore of the line, J. Frank Dobie wrote, and I agree, it is a Grand Canyon cut into the bedrock of human emotions and heroical impulses. So y'all can all decide what you choose to believe about the line of the sand. The historical record cannot prove or disprove whatever choice you make. I just wanted you to know where the story came from. And now back to the Alamo. Night fell over the 12th day of the siege. Reality was hitting like a 12-pound cannonball to the chest for the men inside and outside the walls. Although the Texians likely didn't know that the assault would happen the next morning, they did know that reinforcements were not coming, and those in the Mexican camp knew exactly what was about to happen. According to De La Peña, in the Mexican camp, night brought the most sober reflections. Each one individually confronted and prepared his soul for the terrible moment, expressed his last wishes, and silently and coolly took those steps which precede an encounter. Of the 12th night inside the walls, Enrique Esparza recalled, "At last came a night of quiet, and the exhausted men fell into a deep sleep." Until the final assault, God in Texas, y'all.